Hello everyone, I'm sitting here with Nathan Law, who is an exiled lawmaker from Hong Kong, a very great hero of ours on the EU4U channel, a fighter for democracy, an activist who's been through a lot, who has a very interesting life, and he's agreed to sit down with us and answer some of the questions that you sent to the channel. So let's get right into it,
sure.
if you're ready. First of all, Nathan, how are you doing?
Well, I've been advocating for a very long while, so it's been tiring. The reason why I'm here in Brussels is to participate in a fellowship offered by the European Parliament for human rights activists. So it's part of the advocacy work, and we've been doing okay, in general.
Nice. Well, what kind of stuff are you going to do in Brussels?
Yeah, gonna have a lot of meetings with parliamentarians, meeting with different EU governing bodies, and also I'm heading to Venice, the Human Rights Center, next week for further programs.
Nice. As I mentioned, you're a Hong Kong activist, a Hong Kong politician. Can you tell us, or can you tell the audience who's maybe not that aware of what is happening, what is the current situation in Hong Kong? Are there still demonstrations? What does daily life look like right now?
Yeah, the political situation in Hong Kong is quite dire. The government basically cracked down the whole civil society. They disband all the prominent organizations in the whole civil societies, and most of the political campaigners that I know in Hong Kong are all jailed because of different reasons. The government implemented the national security law last year so that they can have a sweeping power to prosecute or disband organizations which they consider not aligned with their interest or not aligned with their quote-unquote national security, which is vaguely defined. People are being arrested because they speak something, because they hold a certain sign, etc. So this is definitely showing that Hong Kong is entering into another phase of a authoritarian police state, and basically our human rights are not being protected anymore.
And are there still demonstrations going on at a large scale? Because everyone saw the images of 2019 when you had millions of people roaming through the streets. Is that still going on, or?
Well, protests are not happening in a large scale, and even for small scale protests, they're very rare. So for now, people are trying to voice out as an individual that they're in a very small numbers if they are going to have collective actions. So that is the situation of Hong Kong.
Okay, and looking a bit into the future, because what you're saying sounds rather grim for Hong Kong, what would you say are the next steps for the city? What's going to happen?
Well, the city will definitely face a lot of pressure from mainland China, including persecution on political activists, but also on our culture. So on the cultural front, I think people like us who are living overseas have certain responsibility to preserve and grow the Hong Kong culture, which encompasses its identity and the eagerness of fight for democratic future. And that preservation of Hong Kong's unique culture and unique identity is definitely next battleground.
Okay, and we all know Hong Kong is, of course, a pluralistic society, like all societies on the globe. What is your opinion on the different movements? Because also the protest groups have different goals. So there are some who want a total independence of Hong Kong from China. There are some that just want to uphold the democratic election process that Hong Kong had under the two countries, two systems, one country. Sorry, one country, two systems. That's how you say it. Rosa, what is your view on those different groups from the protesters?
Well, I think it's completely normal that we've got different political philosophy, and that's what it should be as a diverse and pluralistic society, and it happens in society and it happens in the democratic movement. What's more important is whether we can find common grounds to work with, and whether we prioritize those common grounds over our differences. I think in Hong Kong, pretty much we agree on democracy, autonomy and freedoms, and these are common grounds for democratic activist groups to work on together. So I think in the 2019 movement, we had demonstrated how people with different political backgrounds could work together. And I think we intend to continue to do it, and we intend to put our common factors first, and we deal with the divergence later.
Okay, and looking a little bit into your own life, into your own backgrounds, You started political work quite young.
Yeah.
Can you tell our community what caused you to go into the political world and what caused you to protest against the Hong Kong government when you were young?
So I grew up in a political family. Both my parents are they fled from mainland China to Hong Kong, and they're blue-collar workers. So they didn't talk about politics at all when we were home. They were kind of like going for stability, don't rock the boat, and they don't really want us to be quote-unquote troublemakers. But eventually when I grew up, I studied in quite a pro-Beijing school, and one remarkable event in 2010 opened up my mind and kind of like triggered my curiosity. So Liu Xiaobo got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010, and on the next day after he got it, the school principal of our secondary school stood on the stage in a morning assembly and publicly criticized him, saying that he's not loyal to his country, he's like messing up with China, etc. So by then I was very curious, because like I learned from books that Nobel Prize laureates are the people who are excellent on that field. So how come Liu Xiaobo was criticized in that way? As a famous dissident, he published a lot of works, books, and there are lots of resources for me to look into his work about democracy and freedoms. So I think that was pretty much the first time that I really had that curiosity to look into political affairs. And then throughout the time when I was in university, I decided to join the student union, because I felt a need for young people to voice out under that really chaotic era, which Hong Kong people were fighting for democracy, but Beijing was not going to give it to us. So I think, that's pretty much my path for me to get involved in politics.
Mm-hmm. And that path has now brought you to Europe, not for amusement or anything. You're actually sadly exiled. You had to leave the country for concerns of your own safety. And speaking of that topic, are you afraid right now that you're away from Hong Kong? And one would assume that you would feel safer because you're in a different continent, different political regimes, etc. But what is your perception and your feeling of safety here?
Yeah, I cannot say that I am completely safe. We all know how extensive the reach of the authoritarian regimes could be, like Russia, like Belarus, like China. So I dare not to say that I'm completely off from the persecution, but I would say that living in the UK or in the EU is generally more safe than other parts of the world. So I will continue to devote myself into activism, even though there is always a chance that the Chinese Communist Party is going to like persecute us.
Yeah. And what I find very important, and that's something I want to stress, you always speak of regime and the party. I think it's important also for the audience to understand it's an issue on a political level. It doesn't have to do with the nation of China as a whole. It's not against the population. It's a disagreement with the governments. And it's always important to stress that, because we've also seen anti-Asian racism evolving because of the corona pandemic and for other reasons. So it's always important to keep that separation. Moving on to the next question, now that you're here, you're meeting with a lot of people, you're continuing the advocacy work. And would you perceive in general the international response as positive towards Hong Kong? Because you of course met with figures like Mike Pompeo, for example, who's a very prominent figure in the United States.
Well, I've met with people from all sides. On the one hand, I met with people in the government and like with certain political party like Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State of last administration. But I will make sure that I also met with Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's from the other side of the politics, so that we can make it a strongly bipartisan issue. And I think the same applies to like in EU and in the UK. And I think generally the awareness is there, but it's just difficult for them to translate it into concrete actions to really hold China accountable. And I think this is not only the problem of like individual legislators, but it is really a lack of understanding and lack of toolbox that we can have under this current international order and a lot of like international mechanism that it is difficult to hold authoritarian regime accountable. So I think it's important that we need a renewal of what we're doing and how we can deploy our resources and our mechanism to really hold them accountable. Mm-hmm. And I found the awareness of having that being considered are growing. I think that's a very healthy sign.
Mm-hmm. And you said you're meeting with people from across the political spectrum. Yet when you post something, or even when we did a post talking about the issue of Hong Kong, we got messages such as, isn't he a double agent? Doesn't he work for the CIA? Doesn't he work for the UK government? What would you say to those people?
Well, I'm not being employed by any foreign agencies. I'm not paid for anything. I'm not trained by them. I think it's very common for the Chinese government to stigmatize activists like us in order to denounce our demands, because when they accuse us as like foreign agents, they could easily swift their responsibility away and then to say that, oh, all the protesters are just instigated by foreign forces. They're not, like, the Chinese Communist Party has done nothing wrong and it's only conspiracy from the foreign governments. And I think that is the way how they kind of like omit their responsibility. So we just have to recognize that this propaganda is helping China to get away from the human rights violation, and we just need to bear in mind that the Chinese Communist Party is and has been doing a lot of human rights violation all over its country, including Hong Kong and in Xinjiang, and possibly a military intimidation to Taiwan. And I think these we just have to analyze things on this standpoint rather than being like told that like some of the protesters are like foreign agents in order to shift the responsibility of China and the Chinese Communist Party away.
Yeah, and just to add something to that, I've personally lived in Hong Kong in 2019 and saw a lot of the protests firsthand, and it is quite crazy to think about what you see with your very own eyes, and then you still have people commenting that this is made up, this is propaganda, and you even have videos on your own phone or pictures of police shooting at underage kids and things like that. So that's just something from my perspective as a team member of EU4U. And since we're on the topic of fighting for freedom, you also have a book coming out actually.
Yeah.
Your book is called Freedom, How We Lose It and How We Fight Back. Can you tell us a little bit what kind of topics you're covering in there, and also when people can read about that?
Yeah, so the book Freedom narrates my story for the past few years of political participation, and it returns to the erosion of freedom in Hong Kong, because what I've personally experienced from a protest leader and to a lawmaker, and then being unseated, being jailed, and then exiled. These are the backdrop of the deterioration of Hong Kong's freedom. So I intend to give a personal insight on what's happening in Hong Kong and guide the readers through the deterioration of it. It is written for international audience. It does not require you to have deep knowledge to Hong Kong, or it is not written in an academic style. It intends to draw your attention and actually to remind you that freedoms are fragile and don't take it for granted. I've listed out the toolbox of the authoritarian regime to persecute Hong Kong and to how they can like close down civil space and take away our freedoms. And these have I think international meaning, and we could apply in our own society and be aware of what's happening around you.
And just to not forget the second part, when is it coming out? When can people read it?
Yeah, so in the UK edition will be out in November, and you could pre-order it online already.
Okay.
And the US edition is in December.
Okay. Well, since we're talking about books and writing, and you also mentioned the word academia, you completed your studies last year in your East Asian studies. At which university were you?
At Yale.
At Yale, okay. And we have a lot of people following us who are also university students. Some of them are doing things like international relations, some are doing political science. What do you think that these topics connected to politics can teach students?
Well, I think,
and especially, sorry to interrupt, what can they teach especially about the last 2 years that we saw in Hong Kong?
Well, of course, we need a fundamental or like a brief understanding of how political system works and what are the differences in between political system. But on top of that, I think political science or international relations is just one of the ways of looking into the issue. It doesn't have to be like looking into that goggles into the what are the things happening in Hong Kong. I think politics should not be dominated by like any field, or like you shouldn't think that, oh, I'm not studying political science so that I should not be involved in politics. It's actually everyone's matter, and it is about everyone's life, so you can have a lot of ways to look into it. So I think it just depends on whether you have an interest in public affairs, whether you're interested in becoming your own voice and being heard, and also when you notice injustice in the society, whether you're mobilized to change it. So if you have that sense, you are the ones who should step into the arena of activism or political work, so they could have a change in the society.
Okay, and on our community, we very, very often stress the fact that as young people, we can make a difference, we have a voice, and it's not just young people, it's everyone who's a citizen in a given country. You can use your voice, you can use your power to stand up, to fight for something that's good. And with that in mind, we had a lot of people reach out to us who also asked how can they support Hong Kong as EU citizens? What is something that we can do? I mean, our audience is young, but you can speak more generally. It doesn't have to be just young people. What can we all do?
Yeah, I think first of all is to raise awareness. Like we need to know more, read more, and understand more what had happened in Hong Kong in 2019, 2020. And then to remind like your political representation that it is happening, and there are lots of bills about Hong Kong that are going to be passed that may be brought up to different parliaments, resolutions about condemning the Chinese government for their human rights violation, and also actions like, for example, trying to have some at least diplomatic boycott on like the Winter Olympic really could raise the issue of it. At the end of the day, what Hong Kong people had experiencing, the origin of the persecution is the Chinese Communist Party, is the regime that claim that they are representing like the Chinese people, but they don't have any mandate and they don't have any respect to the human rights of the population. And I think raising that awareness of how we can have an assertive policy towards China, how we can have more accountability and more checks and balances in the international system towards these authoritarian regimes. I think this is also important to help Hong Kong in a more convoluted way.
And besides the political stuff, is there any way that you would say people can, I don't know, for example, donate money? Are there any organizations that you have in mind that would make sense to support?
Yeah, there are lots of organizations that are doing great work. In the US, we've got Hong Kong Democracy Council. In the UK, we've got Hong Kong Watch and some organizations like Hong Kong ARC that are helping flag protesters, how we can assist flag protesters and also like people under persecution. This is also an important topic that we can work on and we can help.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of people who had to flee Hong Kong. You're one of many that has left their homes. Hopefully not forever. We will see how the situation changes. But to the people living in the EU, in the UK, wherever in the US, across the globe, how do you think they could get in touch with people from Hong Kong if they want to meet them, if they want to listen to their stories? Is there any platform to, well, foster friendship, to foster conversation?
Yeah, I think Hong Kong people are willing to talk to anyone who approached them and to say, what's happening in Hong Kong, and do you know anything about 2019 protests? I think there's like a general empathy in the Hong Kong population that we wanted to share. We wanted to get the stories to a further corner. So whenever you pump into like people living in your neighborhood, like Chinese, like Hong Kongese students or Hong Kongese residents, like immigrants, then just talk to them. I think we can find someone like them very easily.
Okay, and in general, for those who want to stay up to date on the situation, to learn about what's going on, is there any specific source or sources that you would recommend? Any newspapers or blogs or so?
There's a newspaper called Hong Kong Free Press. It's a crowd-funded independent outlet in Hong Kong, specifically for the consumption of like social affairs news. So I think this is a good website that we can look into, like English Hong Kong news.
And other than that, I would suggest also to follow Nathan on Twitter, because you post a lot of stuff on English, so you can understand it even if you don't speak Cantonese. And well, we are already at the last question, I think. And the last question would be, what would you like to say to the world? What would you like to say especially to the people living in Europe?
Well, it's important that we stay vigilant, and it's important that we recognize that we're facing the largest authoritarian regime in the world, and it requires the collaboration of democratic countries in order to hold them accountable. This is not a fight for Hong Kong people, or not only a fight for the Chinese people. It is a fight for all, because it's obvious that the Chinese authoritarian expansion has an influence over the world, and if we do not do something to stop the rise of authoritarianism and the decline of democracy, then our democracy in our own soil would also be damaged and also be endangered. So I think this is an important task that we are bound to do it together.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for your time, Nathan.
Thank you so much.
And it was very great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.